Welcome to Today in the Hypothesis. I want you to step into a scenario with me for a moment.
Yeah, let's set the stage.
Right. So if you were listening to this on your commute or, while you're walking the dog, just take a second to look around your neighborhood.
Just picture your everyday surroundings.
Exactly. Imagine the grocery store on the corner, the local school, the houses of your neighbors, and now imagine watching all of it get completely flattened.
It's a terrifying thought.
A Category 5 hurricane rolls through, or I don't know, a massive 7.8 magnitude earthquake strikes in the middle of the night. Everything you know, the entire geography of your daily life is just devastated.
And it is an almost unimaginable level of trauma. But for millions of people globally, it is an increasingly common reality.
Right. And what happens next is almost universally predictable, right? The news cameras arrive.
Oh, immediately.
The politicians fly in, wearing their windbreakers, making grand speeches in front of the rubble, and you watch as millions, maybe billions of dollars in federal relief and charitable donations are announced on national television.
Sounds like a massive victory on paper.
Yeah, as a resident sitting in the wreckage, you think, okay, the cavalry is here, we're going to rebuild.
But that's not what happens, is it?
No, the cameras leave. Fast forward 6 months, you and your neighbors are like, still sleeping under temporary blue plastic tarps. The streets are still broken. The state power grid is still failing.
Just total stagnation.
But yet somehow, luxury real estate developers are suddenly buying up all the damaged waterfront property in your town.
It happens every time.
The core question we are tackling today is how does that actually happen? How does so much capital enter a disaster zone only to leave the actual victims completely behind?
It is the defining paradox of modern crisis management, really.
Mm.
And the most unsettling part is that it is not an accident.
Wait, not an accident?
No, it is a structural feature of how we have designed global aid and recovery.
Wow. Okay, let's unpack this.
So traditionally, we view disaster recovery entirely through the lens of charity.
Yeah,
right?
sure, like giving to a telethon.
Exactly. We have this entrenched idea of passive, traumatized victims waiting for benevolent federal institutions or large NGOs to save them. But the research we are looking at today flips that entire paradigm upside down.
Which brings us to the core material for today's deep dive. We are looking at a deeply researched, incredibly detailed paper titled Decentralizing Disaster Recovery by Victor H. Sertouche.
And it is a fascinating piece of work.
Yeah, the objective of our conversation today is to completely deconstruct the way the world handles post-disaster aid right now. We are going to explore this radical, mathematically backed framework for bypassing the massive bureaucratic machines entirely.
Yeah, the goal is to put recovery money directly into the hands of the people whose roofs just caved in.
Right. We are reframing disaster recovery not as an act of charity, but as a fundamental battleground for economic democratization and territorial sovereignty.
It is fundamentally about dismantling a system that extracts wealth during a crisis and replacing it with an architecture that builds permanent, localized power.
The premise is that the people closest to the pain are the ones best equipped to engineer the recovery.
Exactly.
Okay, I want to dive into the mechanics of this because to understand the cure, we first have to fully diagnose the disease.
Absolutely.
If you ask the average person on the street how disaster aid works, they'd probably say the government prints a check and hands it to a construction worker to build a house.
I wish it were that simple.
But the reality is vastly more complex. How does disaster aid actually function today? And structurally, why is it failing the very people it is supposed to help?
So, to understand the failure, we really need to examine the prevailing macroeconomic paradigm of disaster recovery.
Okay.
Currently, the system is incredibly top-down. It is heavily bureaucratized, and it is highly privatized.
Top-down, meaning federal agencies dictate everything.
Right. When a catastrophic event occurs, there is an immediate massive influx of recovery capital from federal governments, international bodies, private philanthropy.
The money hose turns on.
But this sudden rush of capital creates an environment that is highly susceptible to a phenomenon the text refers to as macro-freeloading.
Macro-freeloading. That sounds like a heavy academic term for a very ugly reality. Let's unpack that. Who are these macro-freeloaders?
We are talking about a very specific ecosystem of institutional actors.
Like who?
This includes corporate intermediaries, multinational contractors, global consulting firms, and speculative real estate developers.
Okay, the big players.
Structurally, these entities function as macro-freeloaders because they systematically absorb substantial portions of public and philanthropic recovery funding before it ever reaches the ground.
I want to visualize this because the standard analogy is always a leaky bucket.
Right, the bucket full of holes.
Yeah, you try to put out a fire with a bucket that has holes labeled consulting fees and corporate profits. By the time the water reaches the fire, there's barely a drop left.
That's the classic way to look at it.
But, like, reading through this paper, a leaky bucket feels too passive. It feels more like a parasitic vine.
Oh, that's a good way to phrase it.
If you think about the community as a tree that has just been struck by lightning, it's vulnerable, right?
Very vulnerable.
The government pours water capital onto the roots to help it heal. But this macro-freeloading industry acts like a parasitic vine. It doesn't just intercept the water, it actually uses the tree's momentary structural weakness to wrap itself around the trunk.
Right, suffocating the local economy while the vine itself blooms and grows massive.
Exactly.
That is a much more accurate representation of the mechanism. They extract this capital through massive administrative overhead, lucrative reconstruction contracts with highly inflated profit margins, and speculative land acquisitions.
And where does that leave the actual people?
The affected population, meanwhile, is marginalized. They are reduced to the status of passive aid recipients.
Just waiting in line?
Basically. They are merely the backdrop for the disaster, while these external corporate entities act as the highly paid architects of the reconstruction, extracting profit at every single bureaucratic juncture.
But I have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Go for it.
Is it really a malicious parasitic vine, or is this just standard bureaucratic friction? You know, the cost of doing business at a massive scale.
How do you mean?
Well, if you are moving $1 billion of federal money, you need large accounting firms and massive logistics companies to manage it, right? Otherwise, it's just chaos.
I mean, that's the excuse. But the data suggests it is far worse than mere friction. Let's look at the empirical evidence.
Okay, let's look at the numbers.
Specifically, the federal response to Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico in 2017.
Oh, man, that was a disaster.
It was. So the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, announced a tranche of over $97 million, specifically allocated to help Puerto Rico strengthen community resilience and restore critical infrastructure.
$97 million.
Right, and this is a subset of a much larger $584 million nationwide package.
Now, if you are a resident whose home was just destroyed, hearing that $97 million is coming sounds like salvation.
Of course it does. But we have to look at the exact capital allocations to see the pathology in action.
I was looking at these numbers in the paper, and it is staggering when you see where the checks were actually written.
Let's break them down. Out of that pool, $14 million went straight to the Puerto Rico Port Authority for the repair of piers in San Juan.
$14 million for piers.
Another $1.2 million went to the municipality of Comerio to replace compromised culverts.
Culverts, like drainage pipes.
Right. Over $1 million went to the municipality of Patillas to purchase fixed generators for the library, the city hall, and the local support office.
For City Hall, okay.
And $980,000 went to the municipality of Casey for road surfaces and guardrails.
Now, to be fair, repairing a commercial pier or fixing a municipal generator at City Hall isn't inherently evil, you know?
No, of course not.
A functioning port is necessary for logistics. You need to get ships in.
Absolutely.
But there is a massive glaring disconnect here. Millions of dollars are flowing directly into fortifying state administrative capacities and government buildings. But what is happening to the actual human beings living in the surrounding neighborhoods?
Well, the grassroots reality stands in stark contrast to the municipal funding.
Paint that picture for us.
The research highlights that 6 months, half a year after Hurricane Maria made landfall, approximately 1,200 families in deeply impoverished, marginalized communities in San Juan were still relying on temporary blue plastic FEMA tarps as their only protection against the elements.
6 months. Think about that for a second. If you are listening to this, imagine living for 6 months with a blue plastic tarp as your roof.
It's horrific.
Every time it rains, every time the wind blows, you are exposed. Meanwhile, millions of dollars have successfully navigated the bureaucracy to fix the guardrails and the library generator. How does the system justify that prioritization?
It justifies it through the path of least resistance.
What does that mean?
Government agencies prefer to grant massive sums to other government agencies or massive corporate contractors because they speak the same bureaucratic language.
Oh, I see.
Right. They have the grant writers, the compliance officers, and the legal teams required to absorb federal capital.
And a family living under a tarp doesn't have a compliance department?
Exactly. A working-class family does not have a team of lawyers to apply for the funds. That is the defining failure of the top-down model.
So the money just takes the easiest route.
Yes. The macro-level funding fortifies the state and the corporate contractors, but the delayed trickle-down impact on marginalized low-income neighborhoods is a severe systemic failure.
And the paper points out that this system doesn't just fail slowly. When put under extreme pressure, it completely collapses.
Oh, totally.
It talks about the 2020 Southwest earthquake sequence in Puerto Rico.
Yes. Concurrent or cascading disasters expose the ultimate fragility of centralized recovery.
Cascading, meaning one disaster on top of another.
Right. The 2020 earthquake sequence caused an estimated $150 million in total damages just in the municipality of Ponce alone.
$150 million.
During that crisis, the state-led recovery apparatus simply disintegrated under its own bureaucratic weight.
It just broke down.
The island's primary power generation plants failed completely. Extensive damage to public housing units forced 5,000 residents to literally abandon their buildings and camp outside on the streets and in public parks for months.
Wait, 5,000 people sleeping in parks?
Yes!
For months.
So the state fails. The power is out.
Yeah.
People are sleeping in parks.
Mm-hmm.
When you have a failure of that magnitude, it creates a massive informational and operational vacuum. Like, no one is in charge and no one is helping.
Right.
Who steps into that void? Well, initially, it is community-based organizations. Local nonprofits and mutual aid networks step in, operating on shoestring budgets with severely limited staffing. They do the heroic work of basic survival.
Passing out water, setting up triage.
Exactly.
But there's a much darker side to that vacuum, isn't there?
There really is.
Because it is not just local community groups looking at a devastated, paralyzed neighborhood. This is where the concept of disaster capitalism really bears its teeth.
Precisely. When a community is violently destabilized, when families are sleeping outside, the local economy is frozen, and the government is failing to rebuild.
Real estate speculators see an unparalleled business opportunity.
You hit the nail on the head. They recognize post-disaster environments as prime territory for speculative land grabs.
Walk me through the actual physical mechanics of that. How does a speculator steal a neighborhood?
They capitalize on desperation.
Okay.
They deploy capital to purchase severely damaged or destroyed residential properties at deeply depressed valuations.
So if a family has been sleeping in a park for 3 months and FEMA has denied their claim, and a developer offers them a fraction of what their home was worth in cash,
Many families have no choice but to sell just to survive.
they literally buy low while the blood is essentially still in the streets.
Yes. And once they acquire that land, they do not rebuild affordable housing for the displaced residents.
Of course not. There's no money in that.
The economic incentive is to transform working-class waterfronts or desirable urban tracts into luxury resorts, short-term rentals, or high-yield commercial real estate.
Which means the original folks can never afford to move back.
This process permanently displaces the original residents. It entirely erases generational community ties.
So the macro-freeloaders literally buy the ground beneath the community's feet.
Exactly. Ensuring that even when the neighborhood is eventually rebuilt, the original inhabitants are permanently exiled.
Okay, so if we are going to fix this, we have to follow a logical progression. To stop these corporate macro-freeloaders from stealing the neighborhood and displacing everyone, you first have to make sure they physically cannot buy the land.
You have to lock down the geography.
Right. If they can't buy the dirt, they can't build the luxury condo.
That is the foundational step.
Which brings us to the first major pillar of this new framework we are exploring today. How does a traumatized, underfunded community protect its land from predatory billionaires?
They achieve this through a mechanism called a community land trust, or a CLT.
A community land trust.
This is the legal and geographic instrument for securing unassailable territorial sovereignty.
You know, I hear the term land trust, and my mind immediately goes to wealthy families hiding assets to avoid estate taxes.
Oh, sure, that's a common association.
But this is something entirely different. Let's break down the actual mechanics here. What exactly is a community land trust?
A community land trust is a democratically governed nonprofit corporation. Its singular purpose is to ensure permanent community stewardship of land.
Permanent stewardship.
To understand it, we actually have to look at its origins. The model originated in the United States during the Civil Rights Movement in the late 1960s and early 1970s.
Really? I had no idea.
Yeah, it was designed as a way for black farmers in the South to secure independent land ownership and protect themselves from retaliatory evictions by white landowners.
Wow. So it has always been a defensive tool for the marginalized.
Exactly. It is based on a profound communitarian principle.
Sure.
Individuals absolutely have a right to own their homes, to build equity, and to have private space.
Right.
But the underlying land, the physical earth, belongs to the community and should be permanently removed from the volatile, speculative real estate market.
So it legally splits the ownership of a property into two distinct parts.
That is the core mechanism.
Right.
It operates on a bifurcated property rights model.
Bifurcated, meaning split in two.
Yes. The trust, which is governed by a board made up of local residents and community representatives, retains permanent collective ownership of the land itself. The individual residents, or sometimes housing cooperatives, own the physical structures built on that land.
I want to make sure I'm getting this right. If I live in a CLT, I own my house.
You do?
I can paint it, I can remodel the kitchen, I can pass it down to my kids, but I don't own the dirt underneath it.
Correct. You enter into a long-term, highly affordable ground lease with the trust, often for 99 years. You own the house, but the trust owns the land.
So how does that stop the disaster capitalists? If a developer comes to my door after a hurricane and offers me $1 million for my destroyed house, why can't I just sell it to them?
Because the ground lease contains strict resale formulas.
Sell formulas.
You can sell your house, and you can realize a fair return on the equity you've built through mortgage payments and improvements. But the formula legally restricts the resale price to ensure the home remains affordable for the next low-income family.
So I can't just sell it for 10 times what I paid to a flipper.
Exactly. And more importantly, the developer cannot buy the land because you don't own it to sell to them.
The trust owns it.
The trust owns it, and the democratically elected board of the trust will never vote to sell community land to a speculative developer.
That is a brilliant legal firewall. Even if property values skyrocket around you because of gentrification, the land your house sits on isn't subject to market speculation.
Nope. The developer can't consolidate the lots to build a high-rise.
By socializing the ownership of the land, CLTs just strip away the speculative value that attracts external corporate interests in the first place.
They do. The geography of the community is legally protected to serve its actual utilitarian purpose, which is providing secure shelter for its inhabitants.
Especially in an era of escalating climate volatility where disasters act as accelerators for gentrification, CLTs seem like critical instruments for environmental justice.
They absolutely are.
Let's move from theory to reality because the paper provides a phenomenal empirical example of this. Let's talk about the Caño Martín Peña Community Land Trust in San Juan, Puerto Rico.
A fantastic case study.
The text notes this was the first CLT in Latin America and the Caribbean.
It is arguably the definitive modern example of how collective land tenure neutralizes the existential threat of market-driven displacement.
Okay, paint the picture for us.
To understand its impact, we have to look at the environment. Caño Martín Peña encompasses 8 deeply depressed, informal neighborhoods situated along a 3.75-mile tidal waterway.
A tidal waterway right in the city.
Yes, and it connects the San Juan Bay to the San Jose Lagoon. We are talking about a densely populated community of approximately 21,000 to 25,000 people.
And the conditions living along that waterway were incredibly dire, right?
Here we're facing an ongoing environmental and public health catastrophe.
Why? What was happening?
Because of decades of municipal neglect, the area's sewage and rainwater drainage systems were dangerously inadequate or entirely non-existent.
Oh, wow.
The waterway itself had become severely clogged with debris and sediment. As a result, heavy rainfall would cause this highly toxic, untreated channel to overflow, repeatedly flooding thousands of homes with contaminated water.
So it's a massive crisis. The federal government finally steps in and says, okay, we are going to fix this. We are going to fund a massive dredging and environmental remediation project to widen and clean the waterway.
Finally, right?
Yeah, but infrastructure projects of that magnitude have a massive footprint.
They do. And to execute this massive dredging project, the engineering requirements dictated that many of the 1,500 families living closest to the water's edge would have to temporarily relocate.
1,500 families just have to leave. Now, if you are listening, put yourself in the shoes of those families. In a normal, privately held property market, this is a death sentence for your neighborhood.
Complete erasure.
Right. If I leave my house for a year so the government can dredge a toxic river with heavy machinery, What stops a developer from swooping in? I'm gone, my neighbors are gone.
The developer buys the lands for pennies.
The government finishes the dredging. The river is now pristine and beautiful, and suddenly my old neighborhood is prime real estate for luxury condos. The mechanism of displacement seems inevitable there.
In a conventional market, it is inevitable. Those residents would be acutely vulnerable to predatory land grabs.
Because developers aren't stupid.
Right. They are highly sophisticated. They can look at municipal plans and see that a multi-million-dollar federal cleanup is about to transform a toxic slum into a highly desirable waterfront property.
So they would aggressively pressure residents to sell before the cleanup was finished.
Absolutely. If the residents didn't have the collective power of the land trust, abandoning their properties, even temporarily, would almost certainly subject them to permanent displacement.
But the CLT completely rewrites that ending.
It does. Over years of intense community organizing, the residents successfully fought to have the land transferred into a community land trust.
Wow, before the project even started.
Because the land was held collectively, the 1,500 families facing temporary relocation were structurally protected. No individual resident could be pressured, coerced, or bribed into selling their plot to a developer, because the individual resident didn't hold the deed to the land the community did.
So the developer knocks on the door with a briefcase of cash, and the resident says, I can't sell you the land, talk to the trust. And the trust says, we don't sell community land, go away.
Precisely. They successfully secured what they call a recuperation, just a fair recovery.
A fair recovery, I like that.
They maintain their geographical roots while simultaneously allowing the environmental remediation to proceed.
The paper also mentions they were so organized that they didn't just play defense, they played offense. They set up something called the Enlace Project Corporation. What is that?
So Enlace is a specific entity designed by the community to interface directly with the government.
Like they're an agency?
Sort of.
Yeah.
Instead of waiting for federal funds to trickle down through state bureaucracies, Enlace was structured to receive and deploy government infrastructure funds directly for the benefit of those 8 neighborhoods.
That's incredibly smart. They essentially built their own municipal apparatus to manage the cleanup on their own terms.
It is a masterclass in defensive strategy.
But CLTs aren't just about holding the line and preventing gentrification. The paper argues they are incredibly powerful tools for proactive physical reconstruction after a sudden disaster.
Right. And to see that, we have to look at the second case study. The Florida Keys Community Land Trust on Big Pine Key.
Okay, let's look at the keys.
This narrative unfolds in the immediate aftermath of Hurricane Irma in 2017. The devastation in the Florida Keys was absolute. Monroe County recorded 772 buildings completely destroyed or severely damaged beyond repair.
The Florida Keys are already some of the most expensive real estate in the country. If you wipe out 700 homes, the feeding frenzy from speculative real estate investors must be unimaginable.
It is a speculator's dream scenario, frankly.
Yeah.
You have newly vacant, obliterated lots and a highly desirable coastal market.
You would expect them to aggressively buy out the displaced working-class residents, the teachers, the service workers, the people who actually run the local economy but can't afford to rebuild.
Exactly.
So how did the CLT intervene down there?
They stepped in incredibly aggressively. They recognized that the window to secure land post-disaster closes very quickly.
You have to beat the developers to the punch.
Right. So they financed their acquisitions through a complex mosaic of municipal backing and nonprofit contributions.
Let's talk about the exact funding mechanisms, because this proves it's not just a utopian idea. It requires hard capital.
They moved fast. They received a specific grant of $89,000 from the Ocean Reef Community Foundation.
Okay.
They secured another $46,500 from the Florida Keys Hurricane Recovery Foundation. Furthermore, Monroe County itself recognized the value of the trust and actually utilized municipal funds to purchase 4 destroyed lots directly, transferring them into the CLT's control.
The velocity of their response is what stands out to me. The paper notes that by February 2019, they owned 9 lots outright and had secured another 11 lots through a dedicated holding company.
That's remarkable speed for real estate.
But holding the land is only step 1. What did they actually do with it? Because a vacant lot doesn't house a displaced family.
This is where the inherent superiority of the CLT model for disaster resilience becomes obvious.
How so?
Well, a private developer operates under the imperative of short-term profit maximization, right?
Sure.
They want to build the cheapest possible structure that meets minimum code and sell it for the highest possible price.
Make a quick buck.
The CLT operates completely free from that profit motive. Their only mandate is the long-term survival of the community.
So they aren't slapping up cheap drywall and hoping for the best.
Far from it. They focused exclusively on developing highly resilient workforce housing.
Okay.
The structures they commissioned weren't just standard homes. They featured commercial-grade, impact-resistant windows. More importantly, they engineered the roofs and the structural envelopes to withstand catastrophic winds of up to 200 miles per hour.
Wait, let's pause on that. 200 miles per hour.
Yeah.
A Category 5 hurricane starts at 157 miles per hour. They are building fortresses.
They really are.
A private developer building affordable housing is never going to spend the massive extra capital required to engineer a 200-mile-per-hour roof because they can't recoup that cost in the sale price.
Exactly. By embedding disaster mitigation directly into the collective ownership structure, the CLT acts as an unbreachable barrier against the twin threats of extreme weather and disaster capitalism.
The community owns the land permanently, and the structures built on it are engineered to survive the next inevitable storm.
It's a closed, protected system.
Okay, let's look at the progress of our hypothetical recovery model. The community has successfully locked down the land. They have built this legal and geographic fortress. The developers are locked out.
Phase 1 complete.
Right, but holding a deed doesn't put a roof over your head or clear the toxic debris from the streets.
It doesn't.
If the community has to hire a massive multinational corporation to come in with bulldozers and contractors to do the physical rebuilding, all of the recovery money still leaves the local economy. It just goes to a different set of macro-freeloaders. How do you plug that leak?
That is the vital next step. You have secured the territory, but long-term economic revitalization requires a labor mechanism.
A labor mechanism?
You need a system that generates sustainable local livelihoods while aggressively retaining the recovery capital within the community itself.
Which brings us to the second pillar of the framework. Economic democratization through worker cooperatives.
Exactly.
So a worker cooperative, I want to make sure everyone listening understands the baseline here. This isn't just a business that treats its employees nicely.
No, it is a specific legal structure.
This is an enterprise that is owned, managed, and democratically governed by its own employees, right? One worker, one vote.
That is the core definition. The workers are the shareholders.
Yeah.
And when deployed in a post-disaster environment, they represent a formidable systemic alternative to the traditional corporate contractor model. The historical and global data on the resilience of worker cooperatives is incredibly robust. Research compiled by the International Labor Organization, the ILO, indicates that worker cooperatives survive severe economic downturns, market shocks, and physical crises at rates equal to or significantly better than conventional investor-owned firms.
Why is that? What makes them so much more resilient when the economy collapses?
It fundamentally comes down to their governance architecture and their internal incentives.
Okay.
Let's look at a traditional corporate firm. When a crisis hits, say a massive earthquake halts the local economy, the legal and fiduciary priority of the corporate board is protecting shareholder dividends.
The bottom line.
Right. The executives sitting in a boardroom hundreds of miles away will immediately execute mass layoffs, slash wages, or liquidate assets to protect the profit margin for distant investors.
Because the workers are just a line item on a spreadsheet to be minimized.
Exactly. But in a worker cooperative, the workers themselves constitute the board of directors. They control the enterprise.
Oh, I see.
Therefore, strategic business decisions regarding operations, risk, and capital reserves are made with the primary overriding goal of preserving community livelihoods.
Because if I'm an employee owner, I am not going to vote to lay myself off just to boost the quarterly profit margin by 2%.
Never.
I am going to vote to temporarily reduce everyone's hours slightly or dip into our collective reserves so that all 20 of us can keep feeding our families during the crisis.
Precisely. They prioritize human survival over capital accumulation.
Wow.
But let's apply this to a massive post-disaster scenario where millions of federal dollars are flowing in. The paper introduces a concept called the capital retention multiplier.
Let's break that down because this is where the math really shifts the paradigm.
It really does.
Let me try to sketch out an analogy based on what we discussed earlier. Say the federal government allocates $10 million to clear millions of tons of debris from a ruined city. If FEMA hires a massive multinational logistics firm based in another state to do that work, that firm brings in its own management, maybe hires some cheap local day labor, and executes the contract.
That's the standard.
The massive profit margin on that $10 million contract, say $2 million, immediately leaves the community. It goes into the bank accounts of executives and shareholders who have never even set foot in the disaster zone.
Right. It is capital flight.
The money vanishes just when the community needs it most.
That is exactly the standard operating procedure today.
But if the system utilizes the capital retention multiplier, how does it change? Let's say that same $10 million contract is awarded to a coalition of local worker cooperatives.
The outcome is radically different.
How?
The local worker owners execute the debris removal. They earn equitable wages for their labor. But more importantly, at the end of the year, that $2 million surplus profit doesn't vanish to Wall Street.
It stays with the workers.
It is distributed equally among the worker owners as dividends.
And what do they do with that money? They walk down the street and spend it at the local grocery store. They use it to repair their own homes. They hire local mechanics to fix their trucks.
Exactly. The capital is trapped within the affected region. It circulates multiple times through the local economy.
So it turns temporary disaster relief funds from a fleeting infusion of external corporate activity into a permanent, localized economic stimulus.
They are literally rebuilding the local economy from the ground up while they rebuild the physical infrastructure.
And it is not just about keeping the money local, right? It is about the actual quality and accuracy of the work being done.
That's a huge piece of it.
The text places a massive emphasis on the idea that local co-ops have a critical informational advantage over distant federal planners. What does that mean in practice?
That informational asymmetry is arguably the most fatal flaw in centralized recovery.
Informational asymmetry.
Imagine federal planners sitting in an office in Washington, D.C., looking at satellite imagery of a flooded city. They simply do not possess the granular street-level data required to know exactly what specific neighborhoods require in the immediate chaotic aftermath of a crisis.
They operate on broad, generalized assumptions.
Exactly. They know a bridge is out, but they don't know that the local pharmacy is out of insulin.
Wow, right.
Social and worker cooperatives, however, are comprised of the very people living inside the crisis. They possess inherent hyper-local knowledge.
Their operational strategies naturally align with the urgent, highly complex, and localized needs of the community because they are the community.
The paper provides a stunning example of this informational advantage in action.
The Turkey earthquakes, right?
Yes. It details the response to the catastrophic February 6th earthquakes in Turkey. This was a massive seismic event that impacted 11 cities and left millions of people struggling for basic survival.
I remember the footage. It was apocalyptic.
Amidst that chaos, the text highlights a social cooperative called the Needs Map.
The Needs Map. What did they do?
It is a profound demonstration of the logistical superiority of the cooperative model combined with modern technology. They didn't just hand out water bottles. They operated a highly sophisticated, data-driven, map-based technology platform to coordinate complex national and international recovery efforts.
But how does a tech platform function differently than a government agency in that scenario?
Well, a government agency usually operates in silos. Housing does housing, health does health.
Makes sense.
The Needs Map, because it was an adaptable cooperative, could crowdsource and verify data in real time. They could integrate the physical need for tents, the social need for psychological support, and the economic need for supply chain routing into one unified digital dashboard.
They integrated disaster response directly into long-term social policy development, far better than a rigid, one-dimensional state response ever could.
Precisely. And we see that same grassroots, hyper-targeted innovation in Puerto Rico again.
Oh, with Casa Pueblo.
The text talks about the aftermath of Hurricane Maria and the 2020 earthquakes, when the state electrical grid completely failed, leaving the island in darkness for months.
Local groups didn't just sit around waiting for the government to slowly replace the transmission lines.
No, the environmental nonprofit Casa Pueblo executed their own recovery plan, and they bypassed the failed state grid entirely.
Casa Pueblo is the perfect illustration of utilizing localized informational advantage to save lives. They didn't have the billions of dollars that FEMA had.
Not even close.
But they had deep community ties. They executed a plan to surgically install solar panels in 150 critical locations across the island territory.
It was brilliant.
I want to push on the logistics of this, though. How does a local nonprofit just acquire and install 150 commercial solar systems on an island where the ports are damaged, the roads are blocked, and the supply chains are completely frozen? That sounds like an impossible logistical hurdle for a grassroots group.
It would be impossible if they were starting from scratch. But Casa Pueblo had been advocating for and building decentralized solar capacity for 2 decades. before the storms hit.
So they were already mobilized.
They had existing networks, they tapped into diaspora funding, and crucially, they didn't wait for federal permission or bureaucratic sign-offs.
They just acted.
They utilized local electricians, community volunteers, and mutual aid networks to literally carry panels in pickup trucks to where they were needed most.
And the prioritization where those panels went is the key, right? They didn't just blanket an area randomly or give them to the loudest politicians.
Exactly. Because of their hyper-local knowledge, they prioritized the most vulnerable nodes in the community network.
Like who?
They powered small rural hospitals that were running out of diesel for their generators. They powered small community bodegas so people could refrigerate food and buy supplies.
Wow.
Most importantly, they targeted the specific homes of elderly residents who required life-saving, electricity-dependent medical equipment, like dialysis machines and oxygen concentrators.
You literally cannot execute that level of surgical precision from a centralized office in D.C. A federal planner doesn't know which house on the corner has the elderly neighbor on dialysis.
Only the community knows that. Grassroots coalitions possess unmatched dedication to a just recovery.
The paper mentions the Solidarity Brigade of the West and the Single Voice Movement, too, which actually developed its own comprehensive 2-year response plan for earthquake-affected communities while the state was still paralyzed.
They aren't interested in just bouncing back to a vulnerable status quo. They want to build a system that won't fail them next time.
And this movement isn't just a collection of scrappy local efforts. It is highly organized financially on a national and global scale.
Very much so.
The text mentions the Cooperative Development Foundation, the CDF, operating here in the U.S. They have a disaster recovery fund designed specifically to assist co-ops.
Right.
But there is a detail in the paper about them that stopped me in my tracks. They operate with zero administrative or operational fees.
That is a staggering operational detail. 0 fees.
Every single dollar donated goes directly to the cooperatives in need.
There is no executive skimming, no bloated consulting fees. Compare that to major corporate charities that often absorb 20 to 30% of donations just in overhead.
Let's look at how they perform in a crisis. The text brings up Hurricane Helene.
Yes. When Helene caused massive devastation across the American South, the CDF mobilized in a matter of days. They partnered with America's electric cooperatives and national cooperative plus off-grocers.
And the grocers actually pledged to match donations up to $100,000, right?
They did. Through this network, the CDF raised over $143,000 almost immediately.
And where did that money go? Did it go to study groups and white papers?
No, it was routed directly to the front lines.
Okay.
They channeled that capital straight to rural electric cooperatives that were tasked with the monumental job of rebuilding 70,300 miles of destroyed power lines across treacherous, flooded terrain.
7,300 miles.
They also directed funds to the broader food cooperative ecosystem to ensure supply chains remained open.
Meanwhile, on the ground, direct mutual aid networks and worker cooperatives like Poder, Emila Milpa, and Firestorm Books in Asheville were operating as in-person physical resource hubs. They were feeding people and organizing supplies entirely outside the traditional federal paradigm.
It's all about local capacity.
But the paper also introduces a concept that bridges the gap between physical labor and the digital economy. It mentions something called platform cooperativism. What is that, and how does the digital transition play into disaster recovery?
Platform cooperativism is a vital evolution for modern resilience. To understand it, look at the current gig economy dominated by massive corporations, ride-sharing apps, food delivery platforms, freelance labor sites.
Sure.
The workers use the app, but they have no ownership and no say in the algorithms that govern their wages.
Right.
In a crisis environment, we often see exploitative gig economy corporations surge into a disaster zone to extract cheap, desperate labor from people who have lost everything and need immediate cash.
Wow, right. If my house is destroyed and I need money today, I might sign up to deliver food for a massive app, even if they are taking a 40% cut of my earnings. It's like the vultures circling.
Exactly. Platform cooperatives provide a robust institutional defense against that specific form of digital exploitation.
How does it work?
It refers to a model where the workers jointly own and democratically govern the digital platforms they use for their labor. It is a ride-sharing app owned entirely by the drivers. It is a medical platform owned by the nurses.
How does that help specifically in a disaster, though?
By integrating online democratic governance, they can adapt to the crisis safely. Because the workers control the algorithm, they can implement digital telemedicine networks or remote capacity building without exploiting the labor force.
Oh, that makes sense.
They ensure essential services continue functioning while strictly guaranteeing worker rights and fair compensation. It is especially critical when dealing with compounded crises, like a natural disaster layered with a public health emergency or pandemic, where physical organizing is dangerous.
Okay, let's take a breath and look at the architecture we've built so far.
It's a lot to take in.
If you are following along, the community now owns the physical land through a community land trust. They have built a geographic fortress. The local workforce owns the labor and the means of production through worker cooperatives. They have structurally trapped the recovery capital inside the local economy.
Yes.
But post-disaster recovery involves massive, massive pots of money. We are talking about hundreds of millions, sometimes billions of dollars entering a county.
The scale of capital is immense.
So here's the ultimate bottleneck. Who decides exactly which projects get funded first? If there is $100 million in the bank, do we fix the roads to the industrial park? Do we buy the solar panels for the elderly? Do we build the new 200-mile area houses?
Prioritization is everything.
Right. If the government isn't making those decisions, who is?
That is the ultimate question of governance. And it brings us to the third critical pillar of the author's framework: financial autonomy via participatory budgeting, or PB. If CLTs secure the physical territory and co-ops secure the labor, participatory budgeting is the democratic mechanism for capital allocation.
The paper defines participatory budgeting as a civic engagement process where ordinary community members are granted the legal power to directly decide how to allocate a specific portion of a public or philanthropic budget.
Yes, it entirely removes the discretionary allocation power from distant bureaucratic planners, mayors, and federal agencies, and places that power directly into the hands of the affected populace.
So the people who live there write the checks.
Exactly. And by doing this, PB neutralizes those rent-seeking intermediaries and macro-freeloaders we discussed at the beginning.
Because if the community is voting on the budget, they are never going to vote to pay a global consulting firm $5 million to conduct a feasibility study on a bridge that needs to be built tomorrow.
Never. They will vote to allocate that $5 million to the local engineering cooperative to start pouring concrete.
It eliminates the misdirection of recovery funds toward low-impact, high-margin corporate projects. I want to trace the history of this, because this isn't just a theoretical concept dreamed up in an academic paper. Where did participatory budgeting actually originate?
It is a profound democratic innovation, and importantly, it originated in the Global South.
Really? Where?
It was first institutionalized in 1989 in the city of Porto Alegre, Brazil. The initiative was driven by Mayor Olívio Dutra and the Workers' Party.
What was the political context there? Why did they implement it?
Well, Porto Alegre was plagued by severe inequalities and entrenched patronage systems. The wealthy elite and political insiders dictated the municipal budget, ensuring that infrastructure investments paved roads, sanitation, water went to affluent neighborhoods, while the working-class favelas were completely ignored.
Standard corruption.
Right. Mayor Dutra sought to dismantle that patronage network. He realized the only way to break the corruption was to hand the checkbook directly to the citizens.
Wow.
He implemented PB to encourage popular participation and legally force the redirection of municipal resources toward historically impoverished neighborhoods.
And the data shows it worked, right? The case studies from Brazil demonstrated drastically more equitable public spending, heightened transparency, and a massive increase in civic participation.
Oh, massively.
When people realize their vote actually moves money, they show up.
It worked so well that it has proliferated globally on a massive scale. We aren't talking about small, experimental community grants anymore.
How big is it now?
The scale is staggering. In 2023, the city of Paris committed approximately 75 million euros to its participatory budgeting process.
75 million just in Paris.
In the United States and Canada, since the participatory budgeting project gained serious traction in Chicago back in 2009, over $210 million has been directly allocated by citizens to over 500 community projects.
That's incredible.
Even the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, explicitly promotes community-led PB as a highly effective, transparent use of federal block grants.
I want to be really, really clear about the logistics of this for our listeners, because I will admit, when I first heard the phrase participatory budgeting, I pictured absolute chaos.
Most people do.
I pictured an uncoordinated town hall meeting with 200 angry people shouting at each other over a single microphone, trying to decide who gets a check It sounds like a recipe for gridlock.
But the text explicitly notes this is a rigorous, highly structured system. It is not a free-for-all.
Far from it. That is a common misconception. PB is a highly structured, scientifically sequenced process of democratic deliberation, rigorous technical refinement, and final electoral consent.
It's extremely organized.
The author of the paper breaks down the standard PB process into 5 distinct operational phases. Let's walk through those phases because understanding the structure is key to believing it can work.
Sure, let's do it.
Let me outline my understanding of Phase 1, planning and design. This is the foundation. It typically takes 3 to 6 months in a standard municipal setting. A representative steering committee is formed, made up of local residents and community partners. They establish the rules of the game, they secure the implementation funding, and they identify the exact pot of money, say $5 million, that is going to be allocated. Is that accurate?
That is correct. The steering committee writes the rule book. They decide who is eligible to vote, what types of projects are allowed, and what the timeline will be.
Okay, then we move to Phase 2, idea collection. This is where the grassroots input actually happens. They hold public neighborhood assemblies in gymnasiums or churches.
They deploy digital mapping platforms so people can drop a pin on a map and say, we need streetlights right here.
So residents brainstorm raw ideas, and they also ask everyday people to volunteer to serve as budget delegates.
That phase is all about maximum inclusivity. You want to gather every single pain point and idea the community has, no matter how unrefined.
Which brings us to the most critical step, Phase 3, proposal development. This seems like the phase where the magic happens.
It is the heavy lifting phase.
You take those hundreds of raw community ideas like, we need better drainage, and turn them into actionable, costed, legally viable project proposals. Those volunteer budget delegates sit down and collaborate extensively with technical experts, architects, engineers, and municipal staff. They filter, combine, and refine the ideas.
This phase addresses your earlier concern about chaos.
Right.
The budget delegates might look at 10 different sticky notes asking for a playground and work with the municipal architect to design one comprehensive park upgrade that costs exactly $450,000.
So it's not just a wish list.
No, they ensure the ideas actually work in the real world, meet legal codes, and sit within the budget before anyone is allowed to vote on them. They produce a feasible, mathematically sound shortlist for the final ballot.
So by the time an idea gets to a vote, it is a fully engineered proposal.
Exactly.
That leads to Phase 4, the public vote. And this is often where PB really shines because it dramatically expands the franchise of who is allowed to participate in democracy.
Yes. Traditional elections exclude massive swaths of the population. PB processes, because they are deciding local resource allocation, typically allow marginalized populations to vote.
Including kids, right.
This often includes youth under 18, frequently starting at age 14, as well as non-citizens, permanent residents, and formerly incarcerated individuals. If you live in the community and use the infrastructure, you get a vote on how to fix it.
Now, here's a technical question. I know the paper mentions aggregation algorithms used during the voting phase. If we're talking about an inclusive, community-driven process, how does a complex math algorithm actually step in to count those votes fairly? Are we talking about AI deciding who gets money?
No, it is not an AI black box generating decisions. We are talking about mathematical optimization models, often referred to in computer science as knapsack problems or greedy algorithms.
Explain that to me like I'm a 14-year-old voting for the first time.
Okay, imagine you have a knapsack that can only hold 50 pounds. You have 20 different items you want to put in it, all with different weights and different values. The algorithm calculates the absolute optimal combination of items to maximize value without breaking the 50-ton limit.
Okay, I'm tracking.
In PB, the knapsack is the hard cap of the budget, say, $5 million. The items are the projects, each with a specific cost and a specific number of community votes.
Oh, I see.
The aggregation algorithm simply mathematically calculates the exact combination of winning projects that satisfies the maximum number of voters without going a single dollar over the $5 million budget limit.
It ensures mathematical fairness and prevents human bias in the final tally.
Exactly. It removes the backroom dealing.
And finally, we hit Phase 5, implementation and oversight. The funds are formally allocated to the winning projects. The city or the trust signs the contracts, and the steering committee and the public maintain ongoing oversight to ensure the projects are actually built as promised.
That is the complete, rigorous operational cycle of participatory budgeting.
Okay, I love this idea in theory. It sounds beautifully democratic.
Right.
But I have to push back hard here on the reality of implementing this, especially in a marginalized community.
Fair enough.
Let's be brutally honest. Standard top-down budgeting ignores underrepresented communities. But if we rely on a massive, volunteer-heavy system, think about the working-class single parent.
Right.
Her roof just caved in. She is working 2 minimum wage jobs just to feed her kids while fighting with FEMA. She absolutely does not have 100 spare hours to volunteer as a budget delegate, to sit in evening meetings with engineers arguing about drainage proposals.
It's a huge barrier.
Doesn't this structure just mean that affluent retirees who have lots of free time and comfortable homes end up monopolizing the committees and making all the decisions anyway?
You are identifying the single most critical vulnerability of civic engagement models.
So how do we fix it?
If you do not account for the economic reality of the participants, your democratic process will just replicate existing class inequalities. And it is exactly why robust equity frameworks must be hardwired into the initial stages of a proper PB process. You cannot just announce a meeting and hope the marginalized show up.
So how do you actually solve the time and labor issue for working class people? How do you get that single mother in the room?
You pay her for her time. It is that simple.
Really?
Best practices in modern PB dictate the mandatory financial compensation of steering committee members and budget delegates. You must recognize their civic labor as actual labor.
That makes total sense.
If you provide a stipend for their time, provide on-site childcare during the meetings, and provide hot meals, you structurally ensure the committee is not monopolized by those who can't afford the luxury of working for free.
That changes the dynamic completely. You are hiring the community to design their own survival,
Yes.
but that costs money. Where does the funding to run the PB process come from?
The Participatory Budgeting Project has specific mathematical formulas for this.
What?
They suggest that the actual pot of money being voted on must be substantial enough to make the stakes meaningful. They advocate for at least $1 million allocated per 100,000 people in a project area.
Okay.
But crucially, they advocate for a dedicated operational budget of at least $1 per resident.
Let me do the math on that.
Net.
If you are running PB in a city of 300,000 people, you need a dedicated operating budget of $300,000 just to manage the PB process itself.
Correct. That $300,000 pays for the organizers, the outreach materials, the digital voting platforms, and most importantly, the stipends and childcare for the working class budget delegates.
It transforms victims into active, sovereign architects who are financially supported in doing the difficult work of governing.
It empowers them completely.
Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground.
We really have.
If you are listening, let's look at the 3 puzzle pieces we now have on the table. We have community land trusts to secure the physical territory and stop disaster capitalism. We have worker cooperatives to provide the labor, execute the rebuilding, and trap the wealth locally.
Exactly.
And we have participatory budgeting to provide the democratic mechanism for allocating the massive influx of recovery capital.
Those are the 3 foundational pillars.
The author of our source material, Victor H. Sertouche, takes these 3 distinct concepts and synthesizes them into one cohesive, radical master plan for handling all future disasters. He calls it the DRRA.
Yes. The Democratic Recovery and Resilience Architecture.
The DRRA. It is a comprehensive end-to-end framework specifically designed to route international aid, philanthropic capital, and government relief directly into the hands of affected communities, entirely bypassing the macro-freeloaders.
That's the ultimate goal.
Let's break down this architecture phase by phase, because this is where the theory becomes a blueprint for the future. Pillar 1 of the DRRA is all about direct capital ingestion and bureaucratic disintermediation. That is a mouthful.
It is a mouthful.
Basically, how do we get the money directly to the people immediately without it trickling down through layers of consultants for 6 months?
Right. So the framework utilizes 2 distinct mechanisms for capital ingestion. The first tackles the immediate pre-disaster window. It relies on something called anticipatory cash transfers, or ACT.
Anticipatory, meaning before the storm even hits. How does that work logistically?
In regions prone to predictable climate volatility, like hurricane corridors in the Caribbean or typhoon zones in Southeast Asia recovery funds, are prepositioned in digital trusts.
Okay.
The system uses highly specific meteorological triggers. For example, if the National Hurricane Center confirms a Category 4 storm will make landfall in a specific county within 48 hours, that meteorological data triggers an automated algorithm.
Like a smart contract.
Exactly like a smart contract. The algorithm instantly releases a predetermined amount of capital directly into the digital wallets or bank accounts of the residents in the impact zone.
That is absolutely revolutionary.
It changes everything.
Think about the implications of that for a low-income family. Instead of going into credit card debt to buy plywood or taking out a predatory payday loan to afford the gas to evacuate.
Or worse, staying in a flood zone because you can't afford a hotel room.
Right. You get a notification on your phone 2 days before the hurricane hits. The funds are there. You have the liquidity to buy supplies, reinforce your home, or evacuate your family safely.
It fundamentally eliminates the immediate, life-threatening logistical bottleneck of poverty during an evacuation. It saves lives by providing immediate financial sovereignty.
Okay, so the storm passes, the community survives. Now comes the massive post-disaster aid from international donors, governments, and philanthropy. How does the DRRA handle that influx without the macro-freeloaders intercepting it?
This is the second mechanism of Pillar 1. The framework mandates the creation of a zero-fee cooperative recovery trust.
Zero.
Mirroring the CDF fund we discussed earlier regarding Hurricane Helene, 100% of donated or allocated capital is routed directly into this audited financial cooperative. It bypasses all federal administrative skimming, all state-level consulting fees, and lands directly in the central treasury of the community.
Which immediately triggers Pillar 2 governance via councils of the affected.
Right.
The money is in the community bank account. Now they have to spend it. This is where the participatory budgeting model kicks in, but the paper notes it has to be modified for a disaster scenario.
Yes. Standard PB takes 6 months to plan, as we discussed. Disaster recovery requires extreme agility. You cannot spend 6 months debating when the water main is broken today.
People need water today.
Therefore, the DRRA utilizes a rapid response PB model. Within days of the disaster, an emergency steering committee of local residents is formed.
And there's a very strict rule in the paper about who gets to sit on that committee.
It is perhaps the most important rule for preserving local sovereignty. External consultants, federal liaisons, or representatives from massive international NGOs may be invited into the room, but they may only serve in advisory, strictly non-voting capacities.
Wow. They can show the data, but they can't steer the ship.
Precisely. They can provide satellite imagery, engineering schematics, or risk assessments, but they wield absolutely zero allocative power.
The community retains all the power.
Localized assemblies use digital voting platforms to quickly identify immediate survival priorities, water, medical triage, debris clearing. And those aggregation algorithms we discussed calculate the mathematically optimal distribution of funds based on rapid public voting.
This ensures that no single vocal faction or political insider can monopolize the emergency aid.
Exactly.
So if you step back and look at what we've built, I am realizing something massive about Pillar 3. The text calls it the strict solidarity economy mandate.
This is where it all locks together.
When you combine the rapid PB voting with the cooperative labor model, you create a closed loop. The most radical, unyielding rule in this entire DRRA framework is the execution mandate. No PB funds can go to external for-profit corporations, period.
That is the core defense mechanism. It is a completely closed-loop economic system.
It is the ultimate structural defense against disaster capitalism.
Every single recovery contract approved by the participatory budget, whether it's clearing tons of debris, repairing the school, or rebuilding the power grid, must be explicitly legally contracted to local worker cooperatives.
I have to ask the practical question, though.
Okay.
What if the town doesn't have the specific skills required? What if they vote to rebuild their grid with solar, but there is no solar panel installation co-op in the county? Does the system just freeze?
No, the system is designed to build capacity. If a specific cooperative doesn't exist, a designated portion of the recovery budget is utilized to actively incubate and train a brand new worker cooperative to do that exact job.
Oh, wow.
They bring in trainers, they pay the local residents to learn the trade, and they seed the new business.
They literally manufacture the local capacity.
Yes. Alternatively, the funds can be used to facilitate worker buyouts.
How does that work?
Say a conventional local construction business is driven to the brink of bankruptcy by the disaster. The PD funds can be used to buy out the retiring owner and legally convert that business into a resilient, worker-owned entity.
The primary directive is that the millions of dollars spent on reconstruction are legally forced to act as a permanent, localized economic stimulus.
Exactly.
And they apply this closed-loop rule to the real estate too, right?
Yeah.
This is how they lock out the speculative developers permanently.
Yes. Before the disaster capitalists can even mobilize their private capital to fly in and buy up distressed lots, the community acts.
They use their pooled, democratically controlled PB funds to proactively purchase the destroyed land themselves.
They buy it from the displaced residents at a fair price, providing them with immediate cash.
And then they transfer those deeds directly into a community land trust, just like we saw with the Florida Keys example.
Yes, the land is permanently socialized. The CLT then partners exclusively with the local worker cooperatives to build permanent, high-resilience housing.
They build those 200-mile-per-hour wind-resistant structures. Because they use public PB funds and cooperative labor, there is no corporate profit margin inflating the cost. The housing remains permanently affordable and legally protected from all future gentrification.
It's an incredibly powerful system.
And the final piece of the puzzle, Pillar the Fourth, ensures that this entire system doesn't just dismantle itself once the houses are built. It's about long-term autonomy.
Disaster recovery must fundamentally reject the narrative of merely bouncing back. Merely restoring the vulnerable pre-disaster status quo is a failure.
We don't want to go back to what got us in trouble in the first place.
The objective of the DRRA is to use the influx of capital to build a permanently sovereign architecture that will survive the next crisis.
Because the next crisis is always coming.
Exactly. Taking direct inspiration from models like Casa Pueblo, communities utilize their PB funds to construct decentralized cooperative infrastructure. They build localized solar microgrids and community-owned water purification systems.
They sever their dependence on fragile, centralized state utilities that are guaranteed to fail during the next hurricane.
And they fund the human infrastructure, too. It takes organizers to run a CLT. It takes accountants to run a cooperative.
Yes. A designated fraction of the Recovery Trust continuously compensates local facilitators, outreach workers, and cooperative managers to maintain the PB and CLT operations indefinitely.
They use the disaster capital to fund a permanent layer of civic leaders who are ready to manage daily democratic governance and who are instantly mobilized for the next crisis.
This has been a massive paradigm shift. If you have been listening to this entire breakdown, we have gone on quite a journey today.
It really is a lot to rethink.
We started by examining the pathology of macro-freeloaders, the corporate vines that exploit tragedy for profit while victims sleep under blue tarps. We then watched as communities fought back by building geographic fortresses with community land trusts. We saw how they retained their local wealth and rebuilt their economies with worker cooperatives.
Yep.
And we learned how they governed massive amounts of capital transparently with participatory budgeting.
The overarching takeaway from Sertush's research is empowering. The failures of centralized recovery, the delays, the corruption, the gentrification, they are not inevitable accidents of nature.
They aren't?
They are the predictable outcomes of a system explicitly designed to favor bureaucratic intermediaries and disaster capitalists. The DRRA framework proves that communities have the logistical, intellectual, and mathematical capability to engineer their own recovery.
It transforms disaster response from a desperate mechanism of temporary survival into a profound catalyst for permanent economic democratization.
That's the perfect way to summarize it.
It is a phenomenal vision for the future of resilience. But as we wrap up, it leaves me with one final lingering thought. It's something that isn't explicitly answered in the text, but it's the logical conclusion of everything we've discussed today.
What is it?
If you are listening, think about this. We now have the empirical data to prove that everyday communities are fully capable of transparently managing millions of dollars.
We have the proof.
They are capable of democratically governing their own land, organizing their own labor, and designing highly technical infrastructure, all while operating in the chaotic, deeply traumatizing aftermath of a Category 5 hurricane.
Under the worst possible conditions.
Right. If they can execute that level of brilliant self-governance while their world is literally tearing apart, why on earth do we trust them with so little power during times of peace?
It is a profound question.
It's something to seriously think about. Thank you for joining us for today in The Hypothesis. If this conversation changed the way you look at the world, if it gave you a new tool to understand how power works, please subscribe to the show. And share this episode with someone who loves thinking about better ways to design the future. We'll see you next time.